Have you ever wondered how some people are just so good at speaking under pressure at work? Maybe it's your manager, or maybe it's a coworker that you know, who just always seems to know exactly the right thing to say at the right moment in order to achieve a certain outcome. Today I'm going to share with you in a video that's less than 20 minutes, something that's taken me over 4 years of messing up at work left and right in order to realize. And that's how to articulate your ideas effectively in high-pressure meetings. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name's Matt. I've spent the last 4 years working in roles across big tech, management consulting, and banking. And on this channel, I basically share with you everything that I've learned in my professional career. And so if you're here today, thank you. But if you're still with me, make sure you lock in, full screen the video, and follow along. Let's get into it. I first want to start by defining what a high-pressure situation even is. And I know a lot of you are probably like, dude, of course I know what that is. But a high-pressure situation, specifically a high-pressure meeting, is typically one where you are not indifferent to the outcome. What this means is that you care a lot about achieving a certain outcome or convincing the audience in the meeting to take a certain action. A common example of this at work could be, for example, if you want to get promoted this cycle. And so you're about to go into a meeting with your manager where you're going to ask them, hey, can you put me up for promotion this cycle? You know, I've been working so hard over the last 6 to 12 months, really just putting in all the hours, being in the office before everyone else, leaving later than everyone else, being a really big team player, and all that jazz. And you really want your manager to put you up for promo. And so you're not indifferent to that outcome. The outcome actually has a lot of meaning to you. And so I'm going to walk you through the 3-step process that I still use to this day in every single meeting that I go into at Google where I need a certain outcome or I need to convince the audience of a certain action that I believe they should take. And so step 1 is you need to clarify the objective. You need to clarify the goal. Now, what do I mean by this? A lot of times you have a general idea of, oh yeah, I want to get promoted, or oh yeah, I want to convince them to take this action. But what are you actually trying to achieve in that specific meeting? Say, for example, you're trying to get promoted. You're not actually trying to get promoted in that meeting. You're trying to convince your manager in that meeting that they should basically put their neck out for you by putting you up for promotion. The way it works, for those who are unfamiliar with how tech promos work, typically your manager has to put you up for promo, and then there's some sort of higher level committee that's going to decide. But obviously, your manager isn't going to put you up for promo if they don't believe that you are someone who would reflect positively on them. And so you're essentially trying to ask them to put their neck out for you. Now, the second question you should ask, though, is why do you care? And in the example of the promotion, it's probably pretty clear, right? Of course, I want to get promoted because I want to make more money. I want to maybe have a cooler title. I want to have more responsibility, what have you. But what I find is it's never a bad idea to reflect on why you actually care about the outcome that you're trying to drive. And finally, this is the step that most people miss, which is why should they care? And you should really, really think hard here. Why should your manager care about putting you up for promotion? It's very clear to you, of course, but what's in their interest to take that action that you're trying to convince them of? And this requires you to have a little bit of empathy and put yourself in their shoes. But if you do that, you're just going to be that much more convincing because you'll be able to tailor the argument in a way that speaks to them. But once we've accomplished step 1, which is to clarify the goal, let's move on to step 2, which is to start whiteboarding the dependencies. Now, I personally am biased and I love whiteboards, so I always come into a conference room at work and I just start writing stuff, and it really helps me to visualize my ideas. But you can do this on a piece of paper, you can do this on your computer, it doesn't really matter. The main thing here is you need to think about what steps need to happen leading up to that meeting where you want to come in prepared. And so the structure that I typically follow is to achieve X, I need to communicate Y to person person being the audience. Now, in order to communicate and convey why to the person effectively and in a way that he or she actually understands, that means that I need to bring Z. Now, what is Z? It could be many different things, right? To have Z prepared, I need to do A, B, and C. And so typically there's going to be a number of things. Now, to make this more concrete, let's take that example of getting promoted. So to achieve X, X in this case being to convince my manager to put me up for promo this cycle, I need to communicate that I've done a good job over the last 12 months and that I've demonstrated improvement against whatever feedback they gave me last year to my manager. I need to show them that I've improved. And in order to communicate that I've improved to my manager effectively and in a way that he or she understands, I need to bring probably examples, specific examples of things that I've worked on or projects that I've contributed to, that have succeeded, maybe even positive feedback from other stakeholders that I've worked with. And so in order to have all of this body of evidence prepared that shows that I've improved at my job and, other people also think that I have done a good job and therefore should be promoted, I need to do A, B, and C. Now, A, B, and C in this case could be many different things. It could be, let me go back into my notes from previous conversations with my manager where he or she was giving me feedback and we talked about my action plan to improve on that feedback 6 months ago, right? Or it could be conversations that I had with other people, other stakeholders that we worked with where they said good things about the work that I had done or they expressed their gratitude to me for the work that I did. And it could even be something like going back and looking at all the projects that you did, all the presentations that you worked on over the past year, and compiling them into a consolidated list so that your manager can very easily visualize all of the things that you've worked on, all the things that you've accomplished. Right? So that's how I would apply this framework. And it doesn't matter if your situation is not you trying to get promoted. This works for literally any situation at work where you need to convince someone, especially if they're more senior than you, of something that you believe is true. So, you want to communicate an idea, you want to get them on board, and so typically you need to bring evidence which requires you to take a certain series of actions to gather that evidence. But once we have accomplished step 2, now we move on to step 3, which is the execution phase. So how do you actually come prepared to the meeting and take all the action steps that was laid out in the previous step? First things first, you need to commit to doing everything that you laid out right here. You need to commit to everything in your work back. And I tell people this all the time, don't be lazy, but also make sure you're working smart. And so it's probably going to be a lot of work if you try to go and manually look at all of your past meeting notes and sift through like email threads that are like 6 months old and you're like digging through your inbox and everything. But nowadays there's a lot of helpful tools that can actually speed up this process. And so something like Granola, for example, which is a AI notepad. Basically, Granola helps you to transcribe every meeting that you're in. And it's not just a note taker. After the meeting, it also helps you to synthesize the key findings. You can even chat with the transcript. There's this really awesome AI chat transcript feature where you can ask it questions about the meeting. And so if this meeting happened like 4 months ago and you barely remember what happened, you can just ask it, hey, tell me about what we talked about, what were the key takeaways, what were the action items that came out of this, and who was in the meeting, things like that. This allows you to remember all of the things that you've accomplished in the past and to come up with a compelling argument based on all the past meetings that you've been a part of to bring to your manager. In addition to that, it's also just really helpful because it allows you to fully focus on meetings. And so you don't have to be taking notes the whole time. You can, and it'll synthesize those notes along with the transcript, but you don't have to. And so it allows you to fully focus, especially in these high stakes meetings where you want to be listening attentively and not just taking notes. And you want to be able to respond effectively and give your full attention to the other person. Now, there's a link in the description if any of you are interested in using a tool like Granola. There's a free plan, so it's completely free to try. And personally, I've found it extremely helpful in my workflows, and I think you will too. With that, once you've gathered all of the data that's required. Let's say you've prepared all of the evidence. Now, how do you actually effectively turn that into a successful meeting? Well, there's a few steps here that I want to walk you through now. The first is go into a conference room or go into a room where no one else is and where it's quiet and where you can think. And I want you to start thinking about three things. The first is, what is the structure of the meeting going to look like? And how do I want to run this meeting? The second is, how am I going to communicate the ideas in a top-down way that my manager or an executive would understand? And the third is, what sort of implications, takeaways and action items do I want this person to take away from this meeting? Now, let me break down each of these because it's really important. With meeting structure, a common mistake that junior employees make, and that I personally have made so many times in the past, is going into the meeting with only a vague, fuzzy idea of how I want to run the meeting. And then what ends up happening is I go in and I know that I want to talk about one thing, but then, the other person, my manager, brings up another topic, and then the conversation goes in this direction, and then things get completely derailed that way. And you end up not really controlling or driving the conversation forward, which is what you want to happen in a high-stakes meeting. You want to come prepared. You want to show them that you've thought through what you want out of this meeting and how you're going to get there. And you want to also take the pressure off of the listener so that they know that you're driving the conversation forward. They don't have to take up the burden of really pushing it to the next stage. And so a very simple structure you can follow is something like, hey, I want to open up with a little bit of small talk, and then I want to transition into talking about why we're all here today. I want to lay out a quick agenda, and then there's three main ideas I want to dive into, with each of these having a specific example. And then finally, we'll talk about action items and next steps based on your reaction to what I present. Sound good? And then you dive into it. Okay, even something as simple as that. And then when you end the meeting, you want to basically say, okay, awesome. Well, it sounds like as a next step, this person should do this, this person should do this, I will do this, and maybe we'll circle back and find time next week to reconvene. Even saying something as simple as that, which is just like a line or two, demonstrates a lot of initiative, and it also makes you come across as having your shit together and being a more organized person, which is, again, going to work in your favor. Now, the second point here, though, top-down communication. In consulting, every junior consultant knows this. You're taught that you should communicate in a top-down way. And what this means is you always want to start with the main idea first, before branching down into the second-order supporting ideas and the evidence that supports those ideas. And so the reason you do this is to avoid getting bogged down in the details, especially if you're talking to someone who's more senior. They have a very short attention span. They've been in meetings all day. They do not want to be bogged down in the details. They just want to know, what the heck does this person want from me? Why should I do it for them? And what specifically are the next steps? And so if you can just communicate why this matters to them, what you're asking for, and then what you specifically need them to do, then your meetings are just going to go so much smoother. But finally, this leads to the third point, which is the implications and the AIs. And I kind of just talked about this, but essentially every executive and every manager that you have is always going to be thinking about, what are the implications of what Matt is saying to me, and what are the action items that are coming out of that? Why does this matter to me? What do I need to do specifically? And if you can just explicitly make it clear to them what the implications are without them having to think about it themselves, that's just going to take more mental load off of them, which is always a good thing. At the end of the day, the mentality that you should have is a ownership mentality, and you want to be that person that really pushes the conversation forward. Especially if this is a meeting, again, where you want a certain outcome to come out of that meeting, then you should by all means do whatever it takes to push the conversation in the direction that you want. Because if you don't, then you're going to let the other person drive the conversation in a different direction, and it may not be the one that you are looking for. But anyways, that's all I got for you guys today. Hope this was helpful. If you have questions, of course, always drop them down in the comments section below, and I will see you in the next one.